There's something sacred about land you worked your whole life to get. My lake cabin wasn't just a piece of property, it was freedom. It was where I went to breathe after spending years grinding it out in construction, where my dad taught me how to fish, where I planned to teach my future grandkids how to swing a hammer. So when I pulled up one morning and saw a new Range Rover parked in my gravel drive and a half-deflated unicorn pool float tangled in my deck, thought maybe someone got lost. But then I saw the sign, taped right to the front door, private property, Corinson family summer house. I froze. It had my address, but the name on it sure as hell wasn't mine. I tried the door, locked. There were shoes inside, flip-flops, kids' toys scattered on the floor, a pink duffel bag on my recliner. It felt like trespassing in my own home. I backed away and grabbed my phone. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was a glitch with the rental site. Maybe someone mistyped the address. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't random. I dialed the sheriff's department. Yeah, someone's staying at my cabin. I didn't rent it out. Looks like they're claiming it's theirs. The dispatcher asked for my name, and she paused. Sir, someone just filed a civil occupancy claim on that property 2 weeks ago. The Corinson family filed a claim. For what? I own the place. She gave me the number for the county clerk's office. And that's where it started unraveling, because somehow, a fake deed transfer had been filed under my property. And guess whose name was listed as the new owner? Karen Corinson, the same woman who I'd seen at an HOA meeting 2 towns over. She ran a property management firm that was known for buying up foreclosures and flipping them into rentals. She had money, connections, and clearly zero conscience. That night I sat in my truck, staring at the cabin lights flickering through the trees. My own land, my family's place, invaded, taken. I wasn't just angry, I was stunned. Because this wasn't just theft, this was calculated. The next morning, I saw her, stepping outside in a tennis visor, holding a coffee tumbler, yelling something at her kid to stop scratching the deck. My deck. She spotted me and did this little wave like she was being polite to a passing stranger. Hi, you must be one of the neighbors. Isn't the lake just gorgeous this time of year? I didn't even blink. I'm the owner. She laughed. Actually laughed. No, sweetie, I bought it in a quiet sale 2 weeks ago. You should talk to the county if you're confused. I walked off before I did something stupid, but I made one silent promise to myself right then. I'm gonna take back what's mine, and when I do, she wished she never stepped foot on my land. The thing about people like Karen, they don't just steal, they build a whole fantasy around it. They act like they're the victim, like you are the one causing problems. I spent the next 3 days going back and forth with the county recorder's office, digging through filings, and talking to a real estate attorney friend of mine named Mason. He's a sharp guy, ex-Marine turned legal pitbull, and even he was shocked when he saw the forged deed. It's not just a fake, Mason said, flipping through the papers. It's layered. They used shell paperwork and buried it in a stack of transfers between LLCs. Whoever did this knew the system. I knew what that meant. Karen didn't just find my cabin, she targeted it. See, my cabin was tucked outside the jurisdiction of the HOA she ran in Oak Grove Hills, but just barely. Maybe 200 yards past the boundary. It was off-grid enough that most people didn't even know it existed, except it had one thing no other lakefront property had. A private dock and direct water access. To someone like Karen, that wasn't just attractive, it was profitable. I started asking around and found out she'd been trying to get the HOA to expand their reach across county lines, right into the rural fringe where my cabin sat. She wanted to buy up anything she could and convert it into high-end short-term rentals, but no one was selling, so she faked it. She created a dummy LLC, forged a transfer document, and filed it after hours when oversight was lowest. Classic real estate scam. And unless I challenged it officially, it would stand. Here's where things got worse. I went out there again, this time with Mason, and what we saw made my blood boil. They weren't just staying in the cabin anymore. They were renovating it. A whole crew of contractors had been brought in. They were ripping out the natural wood siding and replacing it with some hideous modern grey paneling. The stone fire pit my dad and I built, gone. The rustic dock we hand-carved and sealed by hand every year, bulldozed. Can't do much about it until we get an injunction, Mason said quietly. But we'll hit her with everything when we do. Karen spotted us from the porch and marched down with her arms crossed. That fake plastic smile stretched across her face again. You, again. You can't just come snooping around private property whenever you feel like it. I am on private property, I said. Mine, she laughed. Sure you are. Your paperwork's outdated. You had your chance to challenge it. But now it's mine. Maybe try Zillow next time. Mason stepped forward. Ma'am, this is an active civil dispute, and you're illegally occupying land that hasn't transferred in any valid legal capacity. She didn't flinch. Oh please, I have lawyers too. You'll lose. Go ahead, waste your money. As we turned to leave, one of her workers stopped me. Quietly, almost apologetically. Hey, just so you know, she told us you were some squatter she evicted last month. Said the place was abandoned. Abandoned. That hit me harder than anything she'd said so far. She wanted everyone to believe I'd just vanished, that I didn't exist, that my name, my work, my entire presence, didn't matter. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my garage with the lights off, flipping through old photo albums, pictures of my dad holding up a bass on the dock, my niece roasting marshmallows in a pink hoodie, me standing on the porch with a tool belt on, smiling like I'd finally made it. I'd built that cabin from the ground up with reclaimed timber and months of sweat, and now it was being wiped out like I was nothing. But that's the thing about people like Karen. They always go one step too far, because the next morning, I found out what she did next. She filed for HOA annexation of my entire area, claiming that her company now owned over 70% of the land parcels around the lake, enough to enforce HOA jurisdiction over the neighboring properties. That included not just my cabin, but my neighbors' homes, too. And that woke up a sleeping giant, because these weren't passive, golf cart riding HOA types. These were ex-farmers, veterans, blue-collar folks, who didn't take kindly to some woman in a visor trying to rewrite the map. I made one phone call to the neighbor up the road, a retired sheriff named Hank. He made 6 more. By the end of the day, we had over 12 property owners on board, all ready to go to war if they had to, and I had an idea. Not just to get my cabin back, but to make Karen regret ever thinking she could take what wasn't hers. It's funny how a fence, something so simple, could cause the kind of chaos Karen never saw coming. I woke up the next morning with my hands clenched and my mind racing. The kind of anger that burns cold, not loud, just sharp, focused. Karen wanted to erase me from my own property. Fine, let us see how her property looked once it was surrounded by a 10-foot wall she didn't control. That morning, I drove straight to the county land office. With Mason's help, I pulled the official GIS maps, overlays that showed exact parcel boundaries down to the inch. My cabin lot hadn't been sold, not legally, and the land surrounding it, half of it was still registered to the original homesteaders, people Karen had no idea even existed. Turns out her 70% HOA control claim was full of holes. She'd bought 3 junk lots, pushed fake paperwork through to more, and assumed the rest would fall into place. She was counting on nobody caring enough to push back. Big mistake. I called Hank, the retired sheriff up the road, and laid out my plan. His answer, tell me when, I'll bring the tractor. We didn't build an ordinary fence, we built a fortress, treated cedar posts, industrial-grade mesh, topped with steel piping, so no one could climb it. Every angle was mapped exactly to the legal property lines, not an inch outside. If Karen wanted a fight, she was about to get a masterclass in legal spite. It took 3 days, and on the 4th Karen showed up, red-faced and stomping, dragging her teenage son and 2 hired security guys behind her like they were going to intimidate me off my own land. "What is this?" she shrieked. "A fence," I said flatly. "On my land. Around my cabin, the one you're trespassing in. You can't do this. That cabin belongs to my family now." Mason stepped forward and handed her a certified letter. "Not according to this, and by the way, you're being served." Her eyes darted down the page, scanning the lawsuit. A full-blown challenge to the deed transfer. Damages for destruction of property. A cease and desist for unauthorized construction. And noticed that her annexation was being challenged by 10 separate property owners in the county. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I have lawyers." Mason didn't flinch. "So do we, and we're not bluffing." That's when I saw it, that flicker of doubt in her eyes. For the first time, Karen looked uncertain. Her son, maybe 16, mumbled something about needing to leave. One of her security guys gave me a quiet nod, like even he knew she was in over her head. And we weren't done yet. See, the fence wasn't just a barrier, it was a message. Every contractor she brought in now had to get permission from me to access the site. Her renovation project was frozen, her fancy HOA business plan paralyzed. And because she'd used HOA funds for a project outside their jurisdiction, her own board started turning on her. Hank and I filed public complaints. So did 7 others. Karen's fake annexation filings, under review. Her permits, flagged. Her liability insurance, pulled. And the kicker. That fence triggered a survey dispute with her own lender. Turns out her entire financing deal was predicated on uncontested ownership. Now that it was contested, the bank froze her drawdowns. She was stuck. Completely. I'll never forget the day she came back. A week later, no cameras, no bravado, just standing by the fence in a wrinkled blouse, staring at the cabin like it was already gone. She tried to wave me over. "Hey, I think we got off on the wrong foot," she said, forcing a smile. I didn't move. "I'm willing to be reasonable," she continued. "Maybe we can work something out." I looked her dead in the eye. "You stole my father's cabin, you lied, you faked documents, you tried to erase me from my own land. There is no working it out, there's just the truth. And now you're finally facing it." She turned and walked back to her car. That was the last time she showed up herself. From then on, it was lawyers and phone calls. Desperate ones. She tried to offer a buyout. I refused. She begged to co-manage the cabin as a joint venture. I laughed. She even offered me a spot on the HOA board, probably to shut me up, but I had no interest in sharing. This was war, and I had one more card to play. Because while she was dealing with lawsuits, frozen funds, and public humiliation, I was working on something else. Something permanent. Not just a fence around my cabin, but a land donation that would make sure she never touched a single acre of this lake again. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is best served legally, publicly, and with a smile. While the other side doesn't even know they've already lost. Karen thought this was just about a cabin, but she hadn't done her homework while she was spending HOA funds to pay lawyers, losing credibility with her board, and trying to untangle a mess of frozen permits and contested deeds. I had been working with a completely different team, not in real estate, not in construction, but in conservation law. That cabin sat on a parcel that touched the edge of Lake Minor S Bluff, a scenic, environmentally protected corridor with wetlands, nesting birds, and native forests. It also made it eligible for something Karen didn't seem to know existed. A conservation easement. See, by placing my land, the cabin lot and the surrounding buffer I legally owned into a conservation easement, I could do something she couldn't touch. I could lock it away from all development, forever. Not only that, I could transfer partial ownership of the land to a non-profit trust, a local land conservancy. That meant the land would now have co-ownership with an organization, whose entire mission was to protect it from projects exactly like the one Karen was trying to build. Her HOA master plan required lake access, a trail system, and a small rental lodge to generate community revenue. Too bad her central access point, the only direct trail to the water, now ran directly through protected land. I signed the easement on a Friday. By Monday, the land trust filed notice with the county, permanently protecting the parcel, which legally meant no paving, no commercial activity, No community facilities, no HOA infrastructure, no trespassing, no exceptions. Karen had built her entire HOA pitch on that lake access. It was in her brochures, her funding decks, her sales pitch to every new buyer. And now, it was gone. But it got worse for her, because part of her HOA charter, which I had also obtained through public records, stated that, if access to communal resources becomes legally impossible to develop or maintain, the HOA must return assessments and suspend further capital project spending. In plain English, Karen couldn't legally build, couldn't collect dues for projects, and couldn't touch the land without risking litigation from her own members. It all unraveled fast. Word spread that her lake project had been cut off. Contractors started backing out. New buyers pulled offers. Then, 2 members of the HOA board resigned. Quietly, but publicly. 3 days later, the town clerk received a petition from 7 homeowners demanding a full audit of HOA finances, specifically targeting misuse of funds, unauthorized land acquisition, and improper annexation filings. And that's when Karen finally broke. At a Tuesday night emergency HOA meeting, which I attended, quietly, from the back row, she tried to spin it. She blamed uncooperative neighbors, hostile landowners, and even eco-extremists, but the room wasn't buying it. One woman stood up and said, "You promised a community center, you gave us lawsuits." A man shouted, "You told us that cabin was part of the HOA, turns out it's a conservation site. What else have you lied about?" Karen tried to regain control. "This is a temporary setback," she said, forcing a smile. "We have legal counsel working on regaining access, and no you don't." Mason cut in, "You're being sued. You forged annexation paperwork. You're under investigation by the zoning board. The access you need is gone. And you're personally liable for fraud." The silence after that was deafening. Then someone clapped, then another, until half the room was standing, clapping not for Karen but against her. Karen stormed out. She didn't even stay for the vote. The board voted unanimously to suspend all projects, and just like that, her empire crumbled. The best part, I didn't yell, I didn't fight, I didn't sabotage her property or stoop to her level. I just built a fence. Then I gave the land away. 2 people who actually valued it. Karen wanted to control this place. I made sure she couldn't even touch it, but I still had one more thing to do. Because that cabin, my family's cabin, it wasn't just saved. It was about to become untouchable, and its story would be one she could never rewrite. The fence had been built, the conservation easement had been signed, Karen's HOA had collapsed in on itself like a bad poker hand. But as I sat on the back porch of the old lake cabin that summer, rocking in the same chair my grandfather once did, it didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like justice, clean, final, and deeply personal. It wasn't just about a property line, or even about revenge. It was about restoring something that mattered, and making sure it could never be stolen again. But there was still one more move to make. One final nail in the coffin. Because while Karen was busy dodging lawsuits, resigning from the HOA board, and trying to save what was left of her landscaping business, I was quietly working with the State Historic Preservation Office. You see, my lake cabin, it was built in 1946 by my grandfather, a decorated World War II veteran who returned home and carved out that place from raw land. The beams were hand-cut. The stone chimney had initials etched in from 3 generations. It wasn't just a structure. It was a living piece of family history. And under state law, if a property has historical significance and meets certain criteria, it can be formally recognized as a protected historic site. So that's what I did. I gathered the paperwork, the old photos, the war letters, even a recorded interview with my grandfather from the local Veterans Archive. I submitted it all to the review board. They toured the cabin, talked to the local historian, walked the land, saw the preserved foundation, the original tools still hanging in the shed, and the old lake journal my father had kept for 30 years. 3 weeks later, I got the letter. "Congratulations, your property has been accepted to the State Register of Historic Places." And just like that, my cabin was now officially protected under historic landmark law. What did that mean? Karen couldn't touch it. The HOA couldn't annex it. No one could rezone it, develop near it, or disturb it without a state-level environmental and historical review. It was mine, not just legally, but permanently. It had been family. Now it was legacy. I installed the brass plaque on the front post. A small, dignified marker. Miner's Bluff Cabin. Established 1946. A family homestead. A veteran's piece. The weekend after it was unveiled, people started showing up. Old neighbors, veterans groups, local reporters, even tourists. Once the listing hit the state's public historic registry, that same week, the local news did a short feature on the cabin and its legacy. Guess who saw it? Karen. I didn't hear from her directly, but someone forwarded me a screenshot from her now deleted social media page. She had tried to play victim, called it an outrageous abuse of loopholes and accused outside forces of sabotaging her HOA's plans, but the comments weren't buying it anymore. One person wrote, "You tried to steal a war hero's cabin. You got what you deserved." Another said, "You bulldozed someone's driveway, stole their property, and now cry because it didn't work. That's karma." And the last one, that one stuck with me. Funny how the guy you thought was just some stubborn cabin owner turned out to be smarter, more patient, and far more dangerous. Because he fought with the law, not ego. That's the part Karen never understood. She thought power came from title, from intimidation, from HOA boards and lawyer letters and whispered threats. But real power, real strength, it comes from knowing what's right and being willing to protect it without becoming the villain in the process. Today, the cabin stands exactly as it always has. The lake shimmers the same way it did when I was a boy, and Karen, she moved 3 counties over, sold her company, and hasn't been seen near the lake since, the last I heard. She's working part-time as a consultant, whatever that means. Meanwhile, the new HOA board elected a quiet, retired schoolteacher as president. They've kept things simple. No expansion, no drama, no more wild plans to dominate the lakefront. Sometimes I walk the trail just past my fence. I see families fishing, old couples taking photos of the cabin marker, kids skipping stones, no fences, no fear, and I smile. Because in the end, I didn't just win. I didn't just protect my home.